Hey, what's up guys? Dance here, and welcome back to the channel. So in our last squad leader tips video, we discussed some starter tips for what you as a squad leader should be thinking about at the beginning of the round. And you may have noticed that in that video I did not talk about logi trucks, FOBs, and logistics. And this is because we'll be having a dedicated discussion about those topics in this video. So I know it's a confusing topic for a lot of players, especially for new players and even new SLs, particularly when you go online to try and learn about these things and then you come across things like experienced players talking about the game meta, the FOB meta. So what I want to try to do in this video is break it down comprehensively. I want to avoid rote memorization of metas. And instead, my goal is to try and give you a system of thinking about these things strategically to hopefully equip you with the right problem-solving abilities, regardless of the map or situation you're facing. Okay, so before we actually dive into things, I'm going to quick walk you through the very basic controls of how to place a radio and a hab, because I remember the first time I ever had the squad leader role thrust upon me because our actual squad leader left mid-match and abandoned us without saying a word. I was willing to give it my best shot, but I had no idea how to actually place a radio and a hab, and I needed my squad mates to walk me through it step by step. So first, you're going to place the radio. Now everything is built on top of the radio. It requires no build supplies to place. It does require, however, that you be near a friendly logistics vehicle or a helicopter to place, and you need one teammate. It doesn't have to be a squad mate nearby. If you are a lead crewman or pilot in an armor squad or a helo squad, you need 3 teammates near you. So infantry squad leaders do have an advantage when it comes to logistics. So how you place the radio is by holding T. You're going to have this menu, this rose menu pop up, and you're going to click this button here that says place radio. You're going to click it. There's a hologram. You decide where you want it to go. Left click, boom. It's placed instantly. Now, once you have the radio placed, you need to unload build supply into the blue radio FOB radius to be able to construct anything. These are the ammo points, and these are the build supply points. You can see we have none of either. And how you transfer build to the radio is you bring any vehicle bearing supplies within the blue radio radius. You go up to the vehicle, hold F to interact, then you're going to go to unload construction supplies, and you're going to click and hold. And you can do the same with the ammo supplies as well. Now, once you see you have sufficient supplies to construct things inside of your FOB, you're going to place the hab by holding your T key, same as the radio, but instead you're going to go to deployables, tech structures, hab spawn bunker. This is the actual facility from which players respawn. Now here's a real pro tip. You can use the Q and the E keys to rotate whatever emplacement you want to place to make it better fit in the space you're trying to get it on. And once you're satisfied with the orientation of the emplacement, you can left click and place. For most factions, a hab, which is the actual spawn point, costs 500 build, after which it must be dug up by friendly players with shovels. Squad leaders do not get shovels, so you're not able to place something and then build it up all by yourself. And once this gets dug up, it becomes usable after a 30-second activation period. Now, for unconventional factions like the insurgents, their habs are called hideouts, which only cost 100 supply to place, and they can place 2 per radio rather than the 1 per radio that conventional factions have as a limitation. Now, for every hab that you place, you also want to make sure you place an ammo crate next to it to ensure that any players that are respawning off this hab can top off on their ammo before heading off to the fight. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And you can see that the ammo crate is found in the exact same menu as the hab, just underneath it. It costs 100 build to place. So combined, the total cost of placing a hab and an ammo crate is 600 build for conventional factions. For this reason, I recommend that you load build supply in logistics vehicles in multiples of 600 for conventional factions and multiples of 200 for unconventional factions. And usually I carry enough build for 2 radios worth of habs in most situations. So in this case, I had 1200 build loaded in this logi and the rest ammo. I can use the first 600 to build my first FOB and leave the second 600 banked inside the logi for later use when you need to place a new FOB. For unconventional factions, you only need 400 to do the same thing as a conventional faction, but because you can place 2 Habs per radio, you want to be carrying enough build for 2 Habs by default. And if you plan on placing 2 radios eventually, you want to carry enough build for 4 Habs total, which would be 800 build. Okay, so now let's just walk through the perspective of a squad leader who has decided at the beginning of his match that his squad will be taking a logistics truck. Now, the difference between a good squad leader and a bad squad leader is knowing how important FOBs are in this game. They are a central part of squad leader gameplay and the linchpin of success for your team. So what I want to impress upon new squad leaders is if you do decide to take a logistics truck, you need to be very conscious of the fact that you are now dedicating yourself to undertaking the responsibility of providing your team with FOBs to sustain the team's presence on the field with respawns, keep them resupplied with ammo crates, and also keep the vehicles repaired with repair stations, and also potentially provide key capabilities like mortars and tows. Right? This logistics truck is not just a fancy transport that you can use to get to where you're going. This is a critical team asset that needs to be treated with care, of which your team will typically only have 2 of at the beginning of the match. So keeping that in mind, let's go ahead and claim this logistics truck for our squad. And as I mentioned before, I'm going to change the build load to 1200 and fill the rest with ammo. And now we need to figure out where to go on the map. Where the hell do we go? And this was the biggest problem that I personally faced when it came to FOBs as a new squad leader. I didn't know where to go and where to place a FOB and when. And this is where game knowledge comes into play. So every game of random advance and secure, even with 0 situational context, has 2 locations where your team is guaranteed to need a spawn. So I'm going to quick hop into admin cam here so that we can see where all the points are. So we can see the lane for this layer has gone far east along the south before curving up north, still along the eastern side of the map. The first location where your team is guaranteed to need a spawn is the middle cap. So from your perspective, that will be the 1, 2, 3, 4th point. And the reason is because both teams will typically be able to grab their first 3 relatively uncontested, and the middle cap is the focal point of the decisive action and is usually where the outcome of the match is decided. And depending on who actually controls it, you will need to either attack it or defend it. Either way, you need a FOB here to sustain your team's fight. The second location that your team is guaranteed to need a spawn on at the beginning of the match is your 3rd cap. Because as the 4th objective is the main contested area, you will need to ensure that you have a defense ready on the 3rd. Now, the defense won't always be active. For example, when your team is in control of the middle cap, you will be defending here and attacking the 5th point, if at all. But there is a high likelihood that this 3rd cap will come into play if the enemy team ends up in control of this middle cap or takes it from you, which would turn the 3rd objective into your defense point and the middle cap into your attack point. For this reason, it's highly worth preemptively building a spawn on the 3rd cap. And you want to do it on the 3rd cap, not on the 2nd, not on the 1st. Wait till the 3rd cap. Now, I'm not saying that these are the only 2 FOBs that you will need through the entire game, but in the uncertainty that exists at the start of a match for a new SL, these are 2 beautiful points of certainty that you can latch onto, which also happen to be top priorities for the team at the beginning of the match. So as you're looking at the map, thinking about what your first move is going to be, you should be ensuring with your logistics truck that you are positioning yourself in such a way to be ready to place these FOBs as soon as these objectives have been uncovered and are known. Now, when you're on rollout with your team, one way that you can guarantee this is by assisting with the back cap of the first objective. And the reason for this is because if you take your 9-man squad to capture the first point, usually a different squad will preemptively position ahead of time to capture the second point. And that will in turn allow you, once you've finished the capture of the first point, to leapfrog ahead of the second point and pre-position for the 3rd point wherever it may be. So as soon as the second point gets captured by your team and the 3rd point is revealed, you can immediately roll in to begin the capture of the 3rd point and simultaneously immediately place the FOB. This is my recommended way for new squad leaders to delve into FOB gameplay because it's a very natural progression that requires relatively little map layer and lane knowledge in the RAS game mode. Now, if you have a little bit more game knowledge to work off of, as an alternative, you can do something like roll with some armor as an escort to pre-position ahead of time in the vicinity of where the middle caps might be, and build your FOB on a piece of key terrain so that your team will have an established presence on the important part of the map that the middle objective is likely to appear in. And this will allow your team to hit the ground running when the middle cap does get revealed. So say, for example, this is the map that we're looking at when it comes to rollout. The first point is Paseka. So from the beginning, we can coordinate with an IFE or something and say, we're going to go directly to the southeast corner of the map because we think that's roughly where the middle caps are going to be. A good example of key terrain in the middle of this area would be this hilltop here at L11, where you can place a FOB and a HAB, and it's still going to be able to help your team control this broad area with that spawn, even if it's not perfectly where the point is. Okay, so you've figured out roughly where you want to go on the entire map on rollout as part of your team's rollout strategy. And let's just pretend Paseka is the middle cap or a third point, an objective we need to build a FOB on. The question now is, where do I put the radio? Where do I put the HAB? Do you put it in the objective? Do you put it off of the objective? If you put it off of the objective, how far away from the objective should it be? These are very real questions that new squad leaders run into, and they don't think about them until they are in the moment of placing their FOB. Now, in general, there are two schools of thought when it comes to FOB placement in squad. First is what's called the on-cap FOB, where you place the radio and the HAB inside the capture zone. Second is the off-cap FOB, where the HAB and the radio are placed outside of the objective. Now, obviously, when it comes to attacking an objective, you have no choice but to use an off-cap FOB because the whole point is to try and get inside the capture zone to begin with. But when it comes to the defense, however, if you're trying to defend this capture zone, it gets a little more complicated. And people will try and tell you that one way or another is the better way. And they'll start using words like the meta. I'm going to tell you that these are two different FOB placement strategies that not only have different pros and cons, but have totally different defensive strategies associated with them. My advice is not to pigeonhole yourself into a specific dogma of how, one method is superior over another, but rather use whichever tool suits the needs of you, your team, and the situational context best. Okay, so first let's talk about the on-cap FOB. The on-cap FOB is where you place the radio and the HAB inside the capture circle. And by this nature, it means that these three big ticket items, the radio, the HAB, and the capture zone, are all co-located. The advantage of an on-cap FOB is that you as the defending team can now concentrate your full force of effort to defending one location on the map. This allows you to attain a superior concentration of force against any enemy attacking force. Now, the disadvantage of this is that you have a single point of failure. All it takes is for an attack force to converge on this one location, and your HAB will become proxied, unable to spawn. Your radio will probably be found very close in proximity to the HAB, and the enemy will automatically start to capture the objective almost as a bonus. And the real killer here is the HAB proximity mechanic, because all it takes is one 9-man squad to come within 90 meters of this HAB to render it inoperable, after which it's just a ticking timer before this entire defense collapses. So on-cap FOBs rely on a strategy of hardening and a perimeter defense in depth to be effective. All of your eggs are in this one basket, so your goal now is to make that basket as strong as possible, and even better, to make that basket as hard to reach for the enemy as possible. If you place a radio, this inner circle here is the FOB radius, within which you can construct fortifications and weapons emplacements. An on-cap FOB ideally makes full use of this capability to make the objective area as difficult to attack as possible. And one step beyond this, the death of an on-cap FOB is the HAB getting proxied, so the defense should establish and maintain a defense in depth pushed out from the center hub to be able to detect and defeat enemy attacks outside of the core as they approach. And this means establishing observation posts far out to spot enemy attacks, and then positioning most of your manpower in a perimeter outside of the objective to be able to catch and defeat those attacks before they even get near your HAB and capture zone. If you do not have these two things, an outer perimeter defense and a hardened core, you will end up suffering all of the disadvantages of having an on-cap FOB without enjoying any of the benefits. So it's very important to incorporate these two things into your strategy if you go for an on-cap FOB. The whole thing needs to be like a castle, relying on the outer curtain walls as its first line of defense, with a central keep to be used only as a last resort. Okay, so now let's talk about the off-cap FOB. In contrast to the on-cap FOB, the off-cap FOB not only has the HAB and radio off of the objective, but it's a strategy that relies on concealment and maneuver to be successful. The advantage of an off-cap FOB is that it's divorced from the objective itself, meaning that you'll be able to continuously sustain your team's fight regardless of what's happening on the objective itself. All you need is for this FOB to remain active. The disadvantage is that this FOB is now a separate point of interest, which if discovered, the enemy could dedicate resources to attacking. And because a radio costs 20 tickets, it's not a cheap loss. So whether you are defending or attacking the objective, this could mean that your team will end up in a scenario where it needs to split its forces between the objective and the friendly FOB. And I'm just going to tell you this right now, guys. Off-cap FOBs are vulnerable, so it's best to think of them as literally just being on a timer from the moment that you place them. Throughout the course of the match, it is a foregone conclusion that the enemy will eventually be able to locate, proxy, and destroy this FOB, simply because it's actually really easy to do that when you know how. So what are the implications of this reality for an off-cap strategy? It means that 1, we need to prolong this FOB's life for as long as possible to maximize its impact on the match before it eventually gets located. And 2, it means that our team needs to be ready to put up a new one when this FOB does get discovered, and by necessity, our team requires a new one. So let's quickly bounce back to prolonging this FOB's lifetime while it stands. And the main strategy to do so is through concealment. Contrary to the off-cap FOB, we want to make the radio and HAB difficult to find rather than difficult to attack by placing them in heavily concealed or inconspicuous locations. And to facilitate this, the radio and the HAB needs to be placed far enough away from the objective that it can stay hidden for a reasonable amount of time. But at the same time, it can't be placed so far away that it's just useless as a spawn. So my tip for how to determine how far away from the objective you should place your radio, this is the system I use. I place a FOB creation marker directly on the objective, and this outer circle is the radio exclusion zone, and it is roughly around outside this perimeter where I look at placing my radios. So in this case, you can see that this little warehouse here is a pretty good distance away. Now this warehouse, a lot of people will think, oh, this is a good spot for a radio, but it's wide open, and because it's a building, it's an obvious location to place a radio. So you could place the radio inside that structure. It's not a bad location, but you might consider, for example, placing the radio out here inside of a bush next to a tree where it'll be concealed and not easily found. Usually most people aim to place a radio inside of a bush at minimum. There are certain spots inside urban areas or buildings where there's a nook that you can hide the radio really, really well. Or sometimes these wide open wheat fields have the wheat tall enough where it conceals the radio, and it's just this massive area that the radio could be, and it's really hard to locate. For this example, let's just assume that we've placed the radio inside this warehouse behind this little tractor here. Once I've placed this radio, I want the HAB to be as separated as possible from the radio. And this just helps to ensure that one being found doesn't mean that the other is automatically found as well. Usually the HAB will be found first because it is larger, more conspicuous, and it has friendlies actively spawning out of it, which the enemy can backtrack to locate the HAB. So you do not want the radio to be right next to the HAB when it gets discovered. The HAB itself should be located in a concealed position as much as possible. Now, some maps have really great ditches where you can hide a HAB. Maybe that little depression would be a decent one, but it's next to a road, which is a high traffic area, making it not ideal. A lot of people like to place their HABs inside structures, and this protects them from mortars and indirect fire being used to destroy the HAB, and protects it from being discovered at long range by enemy armor looking through their super optics. Now, once we've constructed this FOB, remember the key to an off-cat FOB is keeping it concealed for as long as possible. Now, part of keeping an off-cat FOB concealed is taking care to maneuver off of the HAB before pushing into the objective proper. Whether you are attacking the point or you are moving in to help defend the point, one of the worst things you can do is just walk in a straight line from the HAB to the objective. And this isn't even from a tactics point of view, just in terms of trying to keep this FOB concealed. All it takes is one observant enemy to notice the flow of players into the objective. A bunch of enemies are coming in from the north side. Then exercise a little bit of trigger discipline, avoid killing enemies, and backtrack the flow to find the FOB. Another way that enemies often find FOBs is by spotting this big conspicuous logi truck, around the vicinity of which is usually the radio. A technique I often use is, if we find an enemy logi truck, just place a FOB creation mark directly on top of it, and usually 95% of the time, there will be an enemy radio inside this FOB creation radius. So once you use the logi truck to place a radio, it's very crucial that you reposition it somewhere else, ideally in a concealed location to minimize the chances that it itself is discovered, so that you can continue to use it later in the match without having it being disabled or blown up, and then you'll have to drive it back all the way from main. The only exception to this rule is if you are sneaking in behind enemy lines and logis are very loud. So once you place the radio, moving the logi could actually increase the chances that you are detected and compromised, in which case you would want to keep the logi's engine off, even if it means it's right next to the radio. So remember, with an off-cat FOB, as the default, players should always take care to maneuver off axis of the HAB before pushing to the objective. But as I mentioned, you can prolong the life of this FOB for as long as you can, but it is a foregone conclusion that it will eventually be found by the enemy. When this happens, you need to be ready to immediately dig down this radio and avoid having it destroyed by the enemy instead, which would cost you 20 tickets. And once that's done, your team needs to be ready to immediately place down a new radio, ideally in a different location. So off-cat FOBs require a lot of thinking ahead, being very adaptable, and in my opinion, there's a greater coordination demand from the team as a whole to use as a sustainable spawn strategy, because the squad leaders need to be able to identify when a radio needs to be dug down, get someone who's there to dig it down, while someone else is already preparing to put down a new one, so that there's no lack of a spawn in the gap between these two. And this might sound like a lot of work, but here is the other strength of an off-cat FOB, which is maneuver. If you're able to execute this whole thing well, what you'll end up doing is actually completely outmaneuver the enemy, because the directions of your attacks will be constantly shifting as your footing also changes, and you'll be forcing your enemy to react to your moves as they play whack-a-mole, chasing your radios around the perimeter of the objective. And keeping the enemy off balance in this manner can be extremely decisive for the fight on the objective itself. Now, obviously, the game does not limit you to just one FOB per objective. In fact, it is very useful in many circumstances to have multiple FOBs on an objective. If you have an on-cap FOB, for example, you could have an off-cap FOB as a backup. Or you could decide, hey, we're going to have two off-cap FOBs feeding into the objective from opposite directions to catch the enemy in a pincer, giving your team a positional advantage over the enemy. So what is the right choice for you to go for? It depends not only on the map and the terrain, but it also depends on your available resources, such as how many logis do you have available at the moment, helicopters, and how many competent squad leaders that are willing to cooperate are on your team. It also depends on the capability of the enemy team. If they are very, very good at hunting your radios off-cap, for example, you might just want to settle with a single on-cap FOB. So this is where the skill aspect of squad leading comes into play. You need to be able to read the situation and make the right judgment calls. All right, so I hope that was helpful to get you started with logistics and FOBs while you're squad leading. Definitely comment down below if you have any questions or if you have something to add. And don't forget, you can support the channel by liking and subscribing. So I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.